Good morning. Welcome to the Center for Clinical Trials Seminar, and we're in a different place. You guys obviously found us, and thanks to Michelle Donathan for putting up signs. I didn't remember myself. So for February and March, 2 sessions were in this room instead of 2030. Now, we haven't gotten notification about fourth term, but as I recall from last year, we are back in 2030. So keep on a lookout when you get these flyers. Make sure you look to see which room we're in. I'll try to do the same. So welcome. This morning we have a person who's probably familiar to many of you, and we're catching him flying in from one place and about to fly out to another, I think. So always on the fly, but I'm glad to hear from him, is Keith West. He's director for the Center for Human Nutrition and the program in human nutrition in the Department of International Health. I asked him a little bit about himself, the countries he works in, that kind of thing. He's worked all over South Asia, and before he got here, which was many moons ago, he tells me, he also worked, which I never knew, in Bangladesh, Indonesia, Japan. He was an army dietitian in Japan, which I never knew. So, but he did graduate from here with his Doctor of Public Health, and he's been here as a faculty member ever since. And he's probably sick of hearing this, but my memory of him, and I wish he'd do a reprise, is at the concert we always used to have next to the international dinner. I don't know when it's given now. I think it's separated. It's a separate concert, and he was a student and sang Jim Croce's Working at the Car Wash Blues, except it was hygiene graduation blues. He says he doesn't remember it, but it was wonderful. So he's also a guitar player. Keith?
My Peugeot stopped, Barbara.
Oh, really?
Both of them. I'm driving a Hyundai right now. I don't know what to say about it. I'm just mortified, but it hurts when both of your 1989 Peugeots die in the same month. It's like losing family. It's terrible. Well, thank you. I shortened the title. Marie, who can't be here today, reminded me when she was looking at me putting my slides together at 11:30 last night that I only had an hour, and I went, huh? It's not a break after an hour, you mean? So I chopped off Africa because actually some of the interesting things to think about, and some of the data that we're most familiar with is actually in Asia, and we have 2 population sites to share with you regarding data. And so I've got my slide thing. I've got this thing. This brings down jetliners. So if I figure I use this instead of this really milk toast pointer here. So I thought I'd go through a story with you about how we've been working on vitamin A deficiency and maternal status and health and mortality over the past 15 years. And in doing so, pointing out 2 research sites where we've been doing a lot of work. In Nepal, the Nepal Nutrition Intervention Project, Sarlai, which is the district in which the project was started, that Al and I, Al's here, did I see him? Was there a fleeting? And Joanne picked out in southern Nepal in 1980 something. 87, 88, 89. Anyway, we did a first trial there, and in children, and then, it was so much fun, we kept on going, and looked at that was a vitamin A and child mortality trial. We looked at then maternal vitamin A and beta-carotene supplementation and maternal mortality and fetal loss and infant death and so forth. And that was so much fun, we just kept on going on other micronutrients, and the site continues today. So that's up here in Nepal. And then in 2000, we started up another site in northern Bangladesh to replicate some of the findings that we found in Nepal, but also to form another flank on the Greater Gangetic floodplains of South Asia. So we have two population sites, one on the northern flank, one on the eastern flank. It's as close as you can get to India without being in India. Looking at nutritional factors that are associated with health and survival in that area of the world. A very important area of the world, home to 400 million people, in rural areas, high mortality rates, lots of undernutrition. And if you can solve a problem in that area of the world, we've solved about 1/3 to 1/2 of humanity's problems in terms of nutrition. So just some important people who have contributed to the research. I need to get this out of the way because I talk too much, and I never get to the last slide. So I figured bring the most important slide forward, because anything I say has very little to do with me and everything to do with 30, 40 other people listed here, and several hundred staff in Nepal, and 850 staff in Bangladesh over the past 20 years. And our funders, of course, just in case they decide to come, Taddy. I don't know if there's any funders here, but you don't want to leave them out, to be sure, because without them we could not be doing our work. So there are 3 trials that have looked at the impact of vitamin A or supplementation with the precursor, dietary precursor of vitamin A, beta-carotene, on maternal health and survival, and fetal health and infant health and survival. There's 3, but I'm only going to really now talk about 2. The one that we carried out in Nepal in 1994 to 97 that reduced maternal mortality and prompted the attempt to extend those findings. And I'm using the word extend purposefully as opposed to replicate. But to extend the findings to another phenotype, another part of South Asia, another population at risk, to see if the findings would be seen there. And then there was another group from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine who carried out a trial in Ghana, in West Africa. And I'll say a few words about it, but I won't go into detail because Marie said I only had an hour. So I always like to show this slide because it frames my thinking at the beginning of a talk. And this is, a young preschool-age child, a teenage child who's about to enter her reproductive life, a mother who's had 2 to 5 children, and another one in arms, breastfeeding. So the entire nutritional demand of early life is represented in this picture. And we know that they have nutritional deficiencies when we measure them, when we can measure them through various indicators. There's lots of behavioral causes to undernutrition, relates to diet and pathogen exposure in the home environment, other disease characteristics that prompt care or not, and that there are health problems, infections and poor growth and mental, human capital development, motor skills and cognition and so forth, survival. All these are health problems in the child and in the mother, and we look for these nutritional interactions and ways to solve some of these problems through public health means to improve nutritional well-being. I took this picture in the Demra Basti camp, a slum in Dhaka in 1977, so I wonder how these kids are doing and how grandma is by now. But also, besides the immediate impact on maternal health and infant health, we're also realizing that there's a long fuse to nutrition interventions in populations early in life, through the mother, through the infant, and so we feel quite blessed about this, that we're able to hold on to these cohorts that we've started, these randomized controlled trial cohorts, and follow them up under a premise that once you're randomized, you're always randomized, especially early in life, and that when you get randomized to a certain exposure early in life, there are changes that occur that actually have a trajectory that may not be observable for 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years. And that's very exciting to follow those events over time in these cohorts. That's another talk. The problem with that, of course, is investigator mortality rather than the cohorts, because you can't follow them forever. You find that they're a lot younger than you are, and that's why you need young investigators. So, but nonetheless, there's chronic diseases and disability and mortality that we are picking up in following these cohorts that we started long ago and hope to keep on going. So a few concepts that I'd just like to toss out and see if I can work my way through to explaining them in any coherent way. Nutritional plane, or the nutritional surface of a population, that actually frames and conditions the population for what kinds of responses you might expect to get with a nutrition intervention if you knew what that plane looked like, what that surface looked like. Nutritional coherence, which reflects the sum of the effects that you should be looking for in a nutrition intervention that are biologically plausible and that tell a story, that fit a spectrum of deficiency that relates to how molecules and cells respond, to all the way to systems in a few people to a large number of people in a population, depending on how deficient they are. And population resonance, which is a term we're trying to deal with, and as opposed to representativeness, which we know has statistical properties to it. Resonance being a population that you don't go to for the sake of convenience, but you go to because it has a set of characteristics that reflects those characteristics of a much larger universe, a much larger population to which you wish to speak with your data and your findings. And so we've tried those terms out occasionally. I thought this is a great group to try those terms out on again. So maternal mortality is a big problem. The latest estimates from a paper that 2007 in The Lancet, about 540,000 deaths occur every year as of 2005. 99.6% are in the developing world. So that makes it a good problem to work on in poor, low-income countries. But there's a wide range, from 132 to 905 deaths per 100,000. And so, the developing world, low-income countries, are as diverse as one might normally expect, and with that comes differences in nutrition, differences in risks of outcomes, and so forth. 45%, so nearly half, are in Southeast Asia, and the estimate for Bangladesh at that time is 570 deaths per 100,000 in Bangladesh. And that's important because we used that figure, not from this paper, because this paper came out long after we started the trial in Bangladesh in 2000. But the data emerging from Bangladesh through the 80s and 90s suggested that the maternal mortality ratio, all pregnancy mortality rate, would be somewhere in the neighborhood of 600 per 100,000. In Nepal, it was 700 per 100,000, and these are comparable population areas. And so it was a reasonable assumption. We built our entire trial around that estimate, and we'll see how terribly wrong we were. What do women die of? Hemorrhage, puerperal sepsis, hypertensive diseases of pregnancy, eclampsia, preeclampsia, and their complications, obstructed labor, shock, ectopic pregnancy, abortion, related complications, hypertensive diseases, other diseases that pregnancy may aggravate, called indirect causes. So all these are sitting there as well in terms of their being part of the morbidity burden in a population that may be exacerbated by pregnancy and by undernutrition in its various ways. Malnutrition is mentioned, protein energy malnutrition, micronutrient deficiencies, and we are thinking possibly vitamin A deficiency. In developing countries, we have evidence of vitamin A deficiency among pregnant women. Using biochemical indicators and looking at pregnant populations, we've estimated that, we've helped WHO estimate that 20 million pregnant women in the world are vitamin A deficient biochemically, and that half of those women develop night blindness during pregnancy. And night blindness is a condition that is at a public health level largely, we believe, due to vitamin A deficiency. It responds to vitamin A supplementation. Vitamin A is a molecule that's needed in the back of the eye and the retina of the eye to detect light under low-lit conditions, to stimulate rod photoreceptor cells to transmit signals to the brain. So vitamin A is a critical molecule in what is called the visual cycle. And if you don't have enough of it, you can't see in the evening time when the sun goes down. And there are lots of terms that describe that condition. And it's a condition that does reflect vitamin A deficiency and quite a range of health consequences. So the data for how much maternal vitamin A deficiency is around is quite weak and sporadic, but you put all these pieces together and you try to develop a world map like everybody else. And if you use the history of night blindness, which is now asked as a part of the core component of the DHS surveys, largely out of work that came out of Nepal and a few other areas, you get this kind of a map where it's peri-equatorial, and where the malnutrition exists, so too does the night blindness. So why vitamin A? Vitamin A is a key, essential dietary nutrient. It is discovered by a gentleman, E.V. McCullum, who was here in this school for decades, 35, 38 years as a faculty member in this school, and is credited with discovering vitamin A. So we have a long history that he passed on the baton, plus a few decades, to this gentleman sitting here in the back of the room, who kept us going and kept us interested in vitamin A. What's that? Did what? Maybe I need a sip of coffee, Al. Yeah. Oh, no. Well, in the middle of the talk, I'm going to ask Dean Emeritus Sommer to do a dance. So vitamin A, it comes in different flavors. It comes as an acid, and it's the retinoic acid that's the active molecule that turns genes on, turns genes off through its transcription process. It's also needed for regulating fuel in the mitochondria of the cell. It does lots of things, the cofactor in the back of the eye, and helps you see. So it does a lot of things, and it's sort of the barn door rather, of nutrition. When these micronutrients started to be looked at, 100 years ago, which we're coming across next year, the 100th birthday of vitamin A, although it's been around a lot longer than that, 100th birthday of us discovering it. It had to be discovered first. It does so many things. Its functions regulate cell differentiation, proliferation through nuclear receptors. It affects how an embryo grows, how epithelial cells grow, how red blood cells grow, immune cells differentiate, bone cells, and so forth. It has a regulatory role across all of those functions, and in addition to the rod cells in the back of the eye and energy production. So in women, in pregnancy, how might a deficient population respond to vitamin A, and what might be mechanisms that are plausible? And we can dream up a whole number of them in terms of protecting the epithelial linings of the body and resisting infection, regulating various aspects of the immune response, protecting populations from anemia because it's needed for the formation of red blood cells, coagulation and wound healing, and as an antioxidant. So there's lots of roles for vitamin A to think about in terms of the problems that women get as a cause of mortality. If we look back in 1931, there was a paper published in a BMJ, and different definitions of puerperal sepsis in women who got vitamin A late in pregnancy and through the early postpartum state. And these are the rates of two different definitions of sepsis, 1% versus 5, 19 versus 30, in those who did not receive vitamin A in that late pregnancy, early postpartum period, and those that did. So it suggested that there's some role for vitamin A in fighting infection. When we attacked this problem in Nepal, beginning about 15, 16 years ago, we found that night blindness was common in the population, affecting 10 to 15% of the women, and Dr. Paul Christian on our faculty did her doctoral dissertation on night blindness and published a slew of papers on what the risk factors are and the importance of this as an indicator of vitamin A deficiency. And turns out that it's also a very responsive group of women to vitamin A supplementation as well. It's got lots of other problems associated with it. When we've looked at night blind women in Nepal and looked at their mortality, and this was by history of field workers whose histories we weren't sure whether they would be reliable or not, but at the end of when the dust settled and we looked at the data, it turned out that their histories were excellent in terms of how they got this condition of night blindness right. When we looked at the mortality rate of women who reported night blindness or not, yellow and blue, during pregnancy in the first 6 weeks postpartum, in the late pregnancy period, and far beyond that, the mortality rates were much greater in women who had ever had night blindness during pregnancy, even though they don't get it. They don't keep it after childbirth. Once you get rid of these metabolic hotbeds of the placenta and the fetus, the demands go down and they drift out of night blindness, but they're still vitamin A deficient and carry a lot of risk in the postpartum state. So, with that as a background, the question we asked back in 1993 was, well, if you give vitamin, you can have high mortality, you have a lot of vitamin A deficiency, women are dying of infections, can you reduce maternal mortality, improve their health? Can you have an effect on the fetus and the infant if you give women vitamin A during pregnancy versus not? So we did a trial in Nepal, and we have these two sites now that I mentioned. The NIPS site, the site that we picked out in the Terai of Nepal in the late 80s, and then in northern Bangladesh. So this is the Gangetic system. So you can see northern flank and eastern flank in 2000. And we've done a lot of studies at these sites. There's involving hundreds of thousands of either women or children asking various questions related to nutrition and health and survival. And they are contiguous, so you might think that they are the same, but they're not. And that's part of the message of this talk as well. So in NIPS 2, which is our second trial of the Nepal Nutrition Intervention Project, and Jivita is a sort of a twisted term of the Bangla word jibito, which means alive. And so if you change the spelling around, a little poetic license, you can make it look like vitamin A or not. You can do things with the word. But the goal was to see if vitamin A or beta-carotene supplementation to women of reproductive age or during pregnancy would have an impact on mortality risk, fetal loss risk, and infant mortality if you got rid of the vitamin A deficiency. So here's life in the Terai of Nepal. It's undernourished, it's pre-transition, it's very, very rural. Animals and people live together. They grow rice, they live in tightly packed villages, they have poor health care, and they have high seasonal fluctuations in resources in food, and it is often inadequate. The diet varies with what is grown, what is in the market, what the prices are, and is not constant throughout the year, and often inadequate. To carry out large trials, you need a lot of trained staff. So these are not the subjects of the trial. These are our staff, only in Nepal, and this is only about 500 or so. In Bangladesh, we have 850 staff. So I keep telling Bob Black that most of his employees are in Nepal and Bangladesh, and they're all looking for pay raises. So this is our clinic that we were building years ago, and this was the staff at the time of the trial that we carried out to look at the impact of giving a weekly dose of vitamin A or beta-carotene at a level that approximates the dietary recommendation, the RDAs, but on a weekly basis, either as the preformed vitamin A or the form of vitamin A that comes in vegetables and fruits, the beta-carotene. And so we ended up with about 22,000 pregnancies. If you can't read this, but it's about 7,000 or so in each group that ended up contributing a pregnancy, women that contributed a pregnancy to this trial, and looked at their survival. in these trials, we map communities. We love to map. We love to map and count. If you can map and count, you can do community trials. And then you have to have some good biostatisticians. But you have to be meticulous in mapping and counting and following. So we mapped 270 communities called wards. We enumerated women 13 to 45 years of age. We admit newly married women who join the community, along the way. They're also the highest risk population group who are going to become pregnant. We do weekly home visits. We dose the women with their coded supplement, ask them if they're pregnant. In this case, since then we got more sophisticated because we can use the urine test that we can get now for about 17 cents each. To test in a surveillance system for pregnancy. We visit on a regular basis. Recruited women, and this trial was about at 4 months gestation. We're a lot better than that now. We get women in their 8th week or so of gestation. And do enrollment interview, 3rd trimester interview, also postpartum interviews, and usually we take a subsample of the population for blood drawing and other enriched protocols to look at the impact on status. So here's what happened. In that trial, we had an impact on maternal mortality. The yellow is the placebo, blue is vitamin A, and green is beta-carotene. And so we had it began to show in pregnancy. There was this effect of beta-carotene and vitamin A and beta-carotene, and it got stronger as the vital experience accumulated to 6 weeks postpartum and to 12 weeks, which was our hypothesized endpoint for this trial, and that turned out to be a relative risk of around 0.6 and 0.5. So we had about 40 to 50% reductions in mortality from a level of about 700 deaths per 100,000 in this Terai community of Nepal, which looks just like the rest of this long stretch of low-lying population farming areas of southern Nepal, and very, very similar to what you would find in Uttar Pradesh and West Bengal and Bihar as well. So that was the big finding from that trial. If you put the two forms of vitamin A together, it was an estimate of 0.56, 44% reduction, highly significant, and it created a lot of controversy, a lot of excitement, a lot of interest to see if one could find a similar impact in other populations. What were the women dying of? Well, lots of causes. If you group the obstetric causes, infectious causes, and other miscellaneous causes, there was this reduction that beta-carotene seemed to do better than vitamin A in this trial. Wasn't significantly so, but it was a surprise because beta-carotene doesn't really do anything as well as vitamin A with respect to the things that vitamin A does, because there's some inefficiencies that one has to deal with. Nonetheless, this is how the causes of death unfolded as obtained by what is called a verbal autopsy. Interviews with the families, interviews about what happened to the women before they died and the period leading up to death, what went on, what care did they seek, and get a full history, and you try to put all that information together. So that was our basic finding. We've followed up these findings since then, and this gets into this notion of coherence, because we followed up the offspring, and we have found that the lungs are larger of children born to vitamin A supplemented women, which has a rich history in the animal literature. There are certain immune cell lines, natural antibodies that populate, develop, and mature in the womb, during fetal life and early infancy, that cease developing after that. So it's an endowment that pretty much stops early in infancy, and those cell lines were more enriched in circulation in children by 10 years of age whose mothers received the vitamin A versus the placebo. So there's a whole range of nutritional effects that one can expect as one learns what the biology of nutrition is and can sometimes find in population settings. So there's mechanisms. Immune competence may have been improved to prevent severe infection, opportunities to reduce anemia in the population, and for beta-carotene, maybe some antioxidant effects, since it actually did better than vitamin A. So these were all hypothesized, but the data that stood was the impact on mortality. So in Javita, and this is where our site is, right where the dome is. There's no dome in this area, but that's how we represent it. It's a large area. You can actually pick it out from a satellite, and it is the size of four times the size of Washington, D.C. in terms of its population of about 650,000 people, about 130,000 women of reproductive age married, that we have enumerated and followed over the years. We have our data management center in Rangpur, which is up this little road about 2 hours, and our study headquarters in Gaibanda, a wonderful little town of about 40,000 people, buses and chickens, and everything you can imagine in front of you as you drive down the street. So we're there, and then we have the study area, which looks like this. These are pictures from Gaibanda. It's a riverine area. It's very wet in the monsoon season, very dry in January, and chilly by and large. Rice is the major crop. Seasonal vegetables, they are more plentiful in the wintertime, not so much in the post-monsoon season. And depending on the season, the roads may be there, or you may have to take a boat to get from one area to the next. That's increasingly less the problem now, because there's been a tremendous growth in road systems throughout rural Bangladesh over the past 15 years. So we have the design. We took 596 communities, just shy of 600 in this area, randomized those communities to 3 different codes where women, as they became pregnant, would be enrolled, consented, enrolled, and start to be dosed about 8 weeks gestation onward through 3 months postpartum. And they'd be followed. They'd be followed in the early trimester, late trimester, 3 months postpartum, 6 months postpartum, looking for risk factors, measuring diet, measuring anthropometry, in a subsample drawing blood, and all the usual things that go on. So we had about 200 sectors in each, and we enrolled about 20,000 pregnancies in each group. In this context, we actually enumerated the 135,000 women and visited personally at their homes every 5 weeks, asked them if they had their period. If they had had their period, we said, thank you very much. We will come back in another 5 weeks. If they did not have their period, we did a urine test. We've gone through millions of urine tests over the past 12 years, millions of them. If they were tested positive, we consented them, enrolled them, and dosed them with their coded supplement, and then started to follow them. 7,000 retinol equivalents, that's about 1,000 a day arithmetically, and that's approximately what an RDA is for a woman during pregnancy through lactation, or 42 milligrams of beta-carotene, which is, if you divide that by 7, it comes out to 6 milligrams. If you divide that by 6, which is for supplements, a reasonable fraction that gets converted to actual vitamin A, it comes out arithmetically to about the same amount of vitamin A beta-carotene, acknowledging that these are not vegetables and they're supplements, versus a placebo. And this is what the study area looks like if you look at it by the randomized groups in terms of beta-carotene, placebo, and vitamin A during the trial. The trial ran from 2001 through early 2007. Here's...
What's the rationale for cluster randomization as opposed to individual?
A range of logistical concerns, primarily, Dan. It was we find that it's much more logistically feasible to have a worker. We essentially randomize workers, and each worker lives in a community of 200 to 300 households, and we're able to prevent a fair amount of what we would expect to be contamination, cross-contamination, cross-supplementation, if it was done at the individual level. People live in these these clusters, and one woman, in the same cluster receiving, with a similar name to another woman receiving different supplements gets very tedious. Yeah, very mixed up. Yeah, so we accept the lesser precision, bump up the sample size, and we're able to, we think, maintain the fidelity of the process. Was there another question?
Manage the migration of a pregnant woman to the maternal home.
To her
Maternal home.
So we had, yes, a good question, because in this culture, a lot of women go to their maternal home in the latter part of pregnancy and deliver there and come back. We had a remote dosing system. So we had these homes all addressed. Every home has a number, and every home actually has a GIS point. I'm not going to go into the GIS system, but we actually have almost 500,000 GIS coordinates in this population that got everything from homes to tube wells to anything that might be important in the community. And so we had a remote dosing system. We had, since we saw these women every week, they would tell us that they're going to their maternal home. We would get the address of the maternal home. If it was in or near the study area, which it frequently is, we had a system where it went back up through study headquarters and out to the relevant field teams, and we knew when to expect the woman. When the woman came, we continued to dose that woman according to her original code. So if they moved to Dhaka or to outside the study area, we had another system where we gave 4 weeks at a time, 4 supplements at a time to the family member, and asked the family member to continue to dose the women. So we did everything we could to try to keep the exposure at the intended level in terms of the nutrients. So baseline, as you might expect, with 20,000 in each group, they were identical across many different variables. It's just a handful in terms of nutritional status, socioeconomic status, and so forth. And their compliance, their adherence to the supplement regimen was also quite good. This one line, the lower line is the line of reflecting the supplements provided to women directly. We had staff directly supplement the women and watch them take the supplement. In every one of these 600 communities, we had a resident worker, a local female trained to do that, and they became excellent at doing it. But there were times when we had to leave a supplement in the home or the remote dosing, and then we get a history of supplement receipt. And so we had little reason in various ways of checking to think that the history was wrong. So we believe that we, for example, achieved about over 90% of all doses in 80% of the women. So, and that's living at home in all 3 groups. So, you think you've got a paper perfect, and then somebody points out within an hour of it coming out the only error that you can find, and you can see that the line didn't get extended here. So you think, you work your whole career to get a paper that doesn't have an error in it. And you think, every time I see this graph, I see this. So here's the findings. Placebo vitamin A beta carotene group, 20,000 in each group. Not numbers of deaths that are associated with having a mortality rate of 500, 600 deaths per 100,000. In fact, the death rates were more in the low 200s per 100,000 during this 6.5-year trial, with relative risk close to 1 and very wide confidence intervals and nothing close to significance in the p-values related to the impact of vitamin A or beta-carotene on mortality of women related to pregnancy versus the placebo. So that was the big finding. And a few other, here's how they look in terms of a graph, and here's the overall. Overall maternal mortality rate of 231, not 570, and certainly not 700. And so as mortality goes down, so does the mix of deaths go down, and the responsiveness of those remaining deaths that may be occurring in terms of the response to nutrition. We had no impact on fetal loss. This is not a surprise. We did not have an impact on fetal loss in Nepal either. It's not a surprise in terms of what we expected. It's a surprise in terms of the nutrition, because we would expect there to be one for lots of different metabolic reasons. We wouldn't expect an impact on miscarriage, because when women are informed that they're pregnant, they have the option always to miscarry, to miscarriage is spontaneous, but this is MR, menstrual regulation or abortion. So we had spontaneous and planned early losses, and there weren't differences there. These are stillbirth rates running at about 4%, which is what you see in the literature, and total fetal losses were not different. Neonatal and infant mortality, here are the number of live births, about 14,000 per group, about 800 deaths per group, and a rate of a neonatal rate of around 55 deaths per 1,000 live-born infants, and when followed out to 84 days, our 3-month equivalent, it was around 65 to 70 deaths per 1,000 live births, and no differences in the relative risks in the vitamin A or the placebo group in relation to the placebo. So, maternal vitamin A or beta-carotene had no impact on pregnancy-related mortality, fetal loss, or infant mortality. The maternal mortality rate was low at around 230. And vitamin A deficiency was low. When we did in a subsample and drew blood at early trimester and late trimester and 3 months postpartum, what we saw was about 7% of the women having low levels of vitamin A versus around 20% in Nepal. There were also differences in night blindness. There were differences that we'll talk about here in just a second between the two settings. And how do those differences then, how do we interpret those differences, and how should we then interpret findings in relation to those contextual differences in populations? They look the same, you think they're going to be the same, they're not the same. There was a Maoist insurrection in Nepal that depressed resources developing in the country, and services being provided, and continuing to provide insult to the population in terms of conflict and all that comes with it. In Bangladesh, throughout the 80s and 90s, even though the statistics have taken a long time to catch up, in fact, the country has progressed amazingly, not just in population growth, that's been there as well, but in terms of infrastructural development, educating women, improving the diet. It's still poor, still a lot of problems, but in relation to Nepal, it separated itself. And so the first observation is, here is the control group in Nepal, and here are our impact groups, about 45% reductions in mortality. And here's our 3 groups combined in Bangladesh in terms of the maternal, the all-cause pregnancy-related mortality rate. So the risk of the outcome is markedly less in Bangladesh than in Nepal. Can we explain it? There has been, this is a paper on a socioeconomic index, and you don't have to read everything here, I'll read it for you, but this is mother's education, husband's education, parity, arm circumference measurement, maternal mortality, infant mortality, and these are quartiles of socioeconomic status developed from a 43-item index that we developed from the study population. And you can see education going up with this index, arm circumference reflecting acute nutritional status, improving across these socioeconomic strata. Maternal mortality rate going down, infant mortality rate going down, infant arm circumference creeping up, diarrhea rates going down, dietary diversity indices going up. When economic conditions change, when there is a slow but gradual shift in resources, in ingenuity, in opportunity, empowerment, education, things happen. When roads get built, life changes forever in a village. And that's what we're seeing in Bangladesh. So over the period of the trial, which takes 7 years, and life changes in communities in 7 years, and so you plan your data and your trial and your design and everything you think you're going to see based on data that's 5 to 10 years old when you start, and then you finish 7 years later and you find, life has changed, and that has been the case. So when we look at the comparison between Bangladesh and Nepal, look at the diet. These are all sources of vitamin A, but they're sources of other nutrients as well, right? There's meat and liver, eggs, milk, fish, fruits and vegetables, dark green leafy vegetables, and so. Reasonable numbers, 18,000 and 60,000 women. And we look at the frequency with which women who would be consuming in the previous week, according to a 7-day dietary frequency, these foods at least 3 times. So nutritionally, let's say nutritionally significant in terms of the frequency. And you can see the ratio in Bangladesh versus Nepal to be, over twice as many women are consuming meat or liver at that level of frequency. 20 times more are consuming eggs at that frequency. Fewer are consuming milk. 14 times that number, in Nepal are consuming fish on a regular basis. 1.5 times more in terms of yellow fruits and vegetables, and a little bit more in terms of dark green leafy vegetables. Not a whole lot, but you can see that there's a shift in the diet of women in Bangladesh compared to those in Nepal in our study area. That's only 250 miles away. In terms of status, yeah, Dan.
So you were sort of saying that there was a big shift in conditions in Bangladesh.
Yes.
Time. Did you look at sort of mortality rates at home? I know you have power to kind of do that, but did it bear out that you split the first 3.5 years of the trial, the second 3.5 years of the trial? Did you see that there's a very difference?
It was tough to see because there were so few deaths. We're going to get a better picture of that because we actually have non-pregnancy related deaths that we're now analyzing as well. And in these populations, we spent a lot of effort reducing maternal mortality correctly, but most deaths of women of reproductive age occur unrelated to pregnancy. 65 to 75% of all deaths that occur between 15 and 45 years of age have nothing to do with pregnancy. They are occurring outside the pregnancy band of influence and for other causes. And then the question is, what are those causes? Because they're dying quietly in homes. They're not coming to health centers. But we have verbal autopsies on another 1,000 women that we're analyzing right now to see how that changes. And we may be able to get that time trend. If we look at serum retinol, the gold standard for what vitamin A status is like, that's not 0.07, it should be 0.7 micromoles per liter. Here it was nearly 20% in Nepal, 7 or 8% in Bangladesh. Here's the rate ratio between the two. Night blindness, the gold standard clinical symptom for vitamin A deficiency, a little bit lower. Surprisingly, not as much. There is some play in the words and the history, and there's still and there may be other reasons for it to occur, but it's lower. Arm circumference is a wonderful indicator of wasting malnutrition. It's not terribly responsive or affected by edematous conditions. It's reflecting, if you pull that cross-section out, you've got fat, adipose fat, you've got muscle, and you have bone. And those are all pretty important compartments of how we grow. And so it reflects wasting malnutrition. It's a good indicator. If you look at this somewhat standard cutoff at 21.5 centimeters, you've got half the number of women, half the proportion of women with wasting malnutrition, and you have 3 to 4 times the proportion educated. And that is reflecting a policy of the Bangladesh government over the past 15, 17 years to pay families to keep their girl children in school. And it's working. You see the education level coming up in rural areas. That was not present either in Nepal in the 90s. And then there's what happens at delivery. In terms of health facilities, and both populations are abysmal in terms of the proportion of births that occur in any health facility at all. The kids drop out on the floor of the home, so they're born at home. The question is whether they are assisted at delivery or not. And in Nepal, I can see that 3/4 of the women delivered with no one, or a family member, or a neighbor there to assist. And that was down to half in Bangladesh. about 8% of these births occurred with nobody around, because everybody's in the field and it's time and nobody's there, and so the baby is born. Unskilled, by Western standards, but nonetheless traditional birth attendants, people who have delivered babies before, and are pretty good at it. In Nepal, it was 15%. In Bangladesh, it was 44%. So if we're talking about a life-saving procedure to save a woman in an acute event, there was a better chance of that occurring in Bangladesh. Skilled attendants, Western trained, properly trained, I guess, both about 8%. Causes of death are here. These are by verbal autopsies. I won't spend a whole lot of time on them, and I put them, juxtaposed them with data elsewhere from Asia. But in Nepal, infection and sepsis, which is a cause that we would think that vitamin A might have a greater traction in reducing, was higher in Nepal. So, pregnancy-related mortality was 30% of the level in Nepal and Bangladesh. Wasting was half as prevalent. There are a lot more women regularly consuming vitamin A-rich foods. Deficiency was less. Birth attendance was more common, and education was greater. There are also more roads and other features. Now, what happened to my? I guess that's my signal. I got rid of them. Hey, you're lucky. I got rid of my talk, the rest of them. So that's the end of my talk. But it was just going to be to bring up some questions, and I can let you bring up the questions instead. And what we see is see, Al, there you are. There's the flip at the end of the talk. We're developing a view that these nutrition trials are rare, they're expensive, you can't do them. We have 3, and of course, where 3 or more trials will gather, there amongst you are meta-analysts. So there's been meta-analyses of these effects, even though one's in Africa and 2 are in South Asia, but now we're understanding to be very different populations. And so I have to ask Larry about how you figure all that out in a meta-analysis. But we have 3 populations. There was no effect in Ghana either, but women are considerably larger and in Africa, and in Ghana there are indications that the status of the women was better across the board. So, do you extend findings or do you confirm? Do you refute findings? If a trial has passed all if it's cut the muster in terms of size and design and rigor, and you get one with a positive effect and one with a negative effect, why should the negative effect be the one that trumps the positive effect in terms of how the global community thinks? So these are questions that we're trying to deal with right now, and I'd be happy to entertain others as well.
What proportion of your budget was for data management? What infrastructure did you have, and who are the kinds of people who work on the data management? You have incredibly rich data.
Right. So we had we're actually moving toward PDAs in the field right now. It's a little hard because when a rhino or a cow steps on them, it's like crushes your data. But we have data collectors in the field. We have reviewers in our field office that would go over. We have a system of reviewing, for consistency and legibility and completeness, trying to catch errors along the way so we can correct them before they leave the field. There are loops that take it from the field to a team leader office, from a team leader office to an area office, from an area office to our headquarters. Every week there are meetings between the data management center, data center managers and the field supervisors to transmit the forms to the data management center personnel. They truck them off to, in this case, Rangpur. We have a data management center with 18 data operators. We process 20,000 forms a week, 20,000 records a week. When the electricity is kind to us. If it's not kind to us, we have generator that kicks on so we can keep keep going. We hold on to all of our forms for 7 years in paper and filed appropriately. And we have two systems that run in parallel to back each other up. We have programmers here at Hopkins and in Bangladesh that correspond with each other now daily to build the system, build the hierarchical system that allows us to maintain a very close, we're able to palpate the data very, very closely and very quickly now, much more than the Aceh days in our first trial 20, 30 years ago. Dan.
So hindsight.
Sure.
So the results are striking, especially in Nepal. I wonder, did your results enter policy? Were you able to inform policy to change dietary patterns to improve supplementation?
Yeah, so that's a good question. We certainly did with the child. We didn't talk about children this time, but the child mortality story in vitamin A generated controversy, more trials that showed positive effects, and it changed how the world views vitamin A deficiency in child survival. In women, it generated a lot of interest, and enough to fund us to do a second trial in Bangladesh, which did not reduce mortality, and another trial funded by the British and by DFID and USAID together, and I think Gates funding, to do the trial in Ghana. So it has not changed policy, but I think the story is still evolving because it comes down to back to this principle of the plane of nutrition on which populations sit, and how well are we able to actually see that before we do studies. We rely on imperfect indicators. These micronutrient deficiencies are called hidden hunger. And they're just as hidden, and that term was coined 20 years ago. They're just as hidden today as they were 20 years ago because of expensive. You have to draw blood, you have to process the blood, you have to put it on Nepal Airlines, you have to take it to Bangkok, put it on Thai to Los Angeles on U.S. Airways to Baltimore, and have it sit in the freezer here for several years before you have, lab technicians on expensive equipment to analyze all this stuff. So it's expensive and it takes a lot of effort. And we work with rather poor data to know what the nutritional profile of these populations are, other than by anthropometry and a few other measures of hemoglobin and a few others. We're getting a lot of understanding, I think, about nutritional differences across populations, and that we need to, as much as possible, understand that context in which we are intervening to know what we might expect in terms of what a change in nutritional exposure can accomplish. So the answer is it's still a very interesting topic, and people are talking about it. I can't say we've changed policy with it yet. With night blindness, we have. There are governments now that are trying to get questions about night blindness asked during pregnancy. Al, do you want to say something?
There's a totally different policy issue, the one that's frustrating me, and that is the policy of how you go about doing meta-analysis, not what you do with people. Because in my experience, people pay almost no attention whatsoever to the context in which a study is. You just say, well, just carry it out, you sample size, you put them all together, and here's the answer. So you got a positive, negative, it's negative. Or yet one positive, two negatives, it's negative. Not, it's positive in this instance because the context was such that it would be positive. And it was negative here because the context was such. No, it's all just kind of mixed together, and then you get an answer. And I would like to see, maybe I'm just missing it because I don't read the right literature, more people paying attention to the implications of the context in which a perfectly well-done study is done that gives a different result from another perfectly well-done study.
I was actually, the issue is I wasn't saying in hindsight what we could have done differently. That was kind of the question. And I guess, you learned about the nutritional profile of these populations before you may, have done something differently. But in terms of the meta-analysis question, people who you thought a priori were at great advantage. So you took crossing the people who had night blindness right? Would we have enough power across studies if they, people who had night blindness at a baseline and do a meta-analysis among that group and see whether
that would make a lot of sense. And in fact, what gives me great confidence in the original Maternal study is that when we do this data study, you just start taking them apart afterwards. You look at the overall result and you start piecing it apart and saying, are there internal consistencies here? So there were basically three groups in that original Maternal study. There were those who didn't have night blindness to begin with. There were those who did have night blindness but got either vitamin A or beta there. Those three groups all had exactly the same low mortality. The only group where all the more excess mortality was saved and was prevented in the active arm were the women with night blind and or sinus. So internal is absolutely consistent and would say exactly what you just proposed would be the case if we did that in Bangladesh. The problem is there was so little night blindness in Bangladesh that there wouldn't be enough cases to be able to do that.
Separately.
The other
I think separately in Bangladesh, but if you pull and you've got Africa data, you've got if you do, they show no night blindness.
Yeah, the Ghana study had no night blindness.
All the night blindness were in Nepal. We already know what the results are.
And in Bangladesh, because of the findings in Nepal, when we detected, we tried. We didn't, it wasn't 100% successful, but we actually treated night blindness when we found it in the third trimester. So we gave them vitamin A irrespective of their code.
One of the things that we find repeatedly, and it happens in every single study, almost anywhere, is we went on the best available data. So the best available data, the official Bangladeshi results, and other people work with them, was this the same high vitamin A deficiency, high mortality, maternal ratios. And of course, it turned out not to be. The population had changed.
Tom.
Well, I hope my comment isn't going to violate Cochrane guidelines. I'm thinking going else more general, that I think meta-analysis should do the synthesis, absolutely characterized in a statistical way, if you like, the between-study variation, but not just say, well, thank you very much, it's large, but to have, if it's large enough so that it's actually trumping, if you like, some main effect, so then you have to start looking at it in a case study mode or a subgroup mode, and that's your biggest obligation.
Right.
It's not that you should sign off on we have an estimate of this and it's standard error is that. That's maybe step one or step zero, and it needs to go.
Yeah, but you know what? The wider constituencies who then read these papers, they walk away with one number. And here it is. It's 15 years of...
Walk away with the other two numbers that they might have.
Yes, right. Patty?
Yeah, I don't mean to get the last word, but we are running the end of time, so I'll let someone have the last word after me. But I don't know if there's a particular Cochrane review, but I wouldn't meta-analyze these studies. They're so heterogeneous, and I would have that qualitative synthesis, which is a part, which Tom's talking about, which is a part of every Cochrane review. So that's what I say. Yeah. It doesn't mean that.
There is one. IMDAD is the last author.
2 studies?
3. One in West Africa and these two, and they are as different as $2 and $3 bills.
They give a summary estimate.
They do, and it's not significant. Like Al said, you have 2 negatives and 1 positive. You're.
What I heard listening to this, and we all hear different things, is I was thinking of the number of the orals, where I hear students here who merge data sets because their advisor has 2 data sets from 2 different countries, and then an analysis, which I think is similar to the type of meta-analysis that's being talked about here. I think we should be cautious.
Right. That would be for the country of Ghana.
So somebody else can have the last word, but we are supposed to end.
Okay. Is there one more closing shot? Yeah.
Is there a population level marker for vitamin A deficiency? If we do not have one, what are the barriers to identifying one?
So the population marker can be clinical if the plane of nutrition is low enough so that women develop, for example, night blindness during pregnancy, or children which is common if they're not in a vitamin A supplemented routine already, can serve as an indicator. And then there's serum retinol levels, circulating levels of vitamin A in plasma or serum, and there's a standard cutoff for that. But that's you have to draw the blood and go through all those hoops for it. We're actually working on a proteomics approach to assessing not just only vitamin A, but many micronutrients simultaneously, because if you find proteins that predict the nutrients, you can just measure the proteins one time and get lots of nutrients. So gaining some efficiencies that way may be possible in the future.
Great. Well, thank you.
Thank you.